Hello, participants. I believe you should all be able to hear me. I apologize for these technical difficulties. I just want to make sure if there's some way I could check that everyone can hear me. I'm going to allow someone to talk. Fabiana, if you could you just let me know that you're connected and can see me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
I
Or I'm
can
going to
see you
disable your
and hear you.
talking.
I just thought,
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I cut you off, Fabiana.
no worries.
Okay, I'm gonna take away your talking permission for now, and we're gonna start the session. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I believe everyone can see and hear me now. Thank you so much for your patience. I appreciate it very much. We had some technical difficulties this morning, but now we're right on track. So this session is, let me get my slides up for us. And I'll make it look pretty. Students with high support needs and music, presented by myself, Rachel Weishoff. I just want to set one thing for us, and then I will, oops. Presenter view, and I would also like to make sure that we are recording. So bear with me. I'm going to record. I think we are already recording. Terrific. We're recording. We can officially begin our session. I'm super excited to be with you today. This is a subject, a topic that I'm really passionate about. I am a music educator and I specialize in teaching students with high support needs. We're going to learn a little bit more about what high support needs means and what that means for us as educators in supporting our students with high support needs. So I wanted to start with this quote. It's from a book that I love called Beyond Behaviors. I would highly recommend it for any educator, even those working with students with a variety of support needs. It has a lot of relevant information. So, students have their own unique ways of responding to the world based on their individual differences. Understanding these differences is essential in supporting students. Some of you may be here because you're struggling to support a student with high support needs, also known as a severe disability. Others might be here because they'd like to gain some extra knowledge. Either way, I'm really glad you're here. It's my belief that music education is every student's right. And legally, every student is entitled to a well-rounded, appropriate, safe education. And music education is included in that well-rounded education. You being here this morning is helping us to get closer to achieving that goal. So a little bit about me. Before I started my teaching career, I was an operatic performer, and my side hustle, if you will, while I was performing was support work. So while my friends, my other performing friends, were waitressing, I fell into support work, personal care assisting and supporting individuals with disabilities. and I fell in love with the work. And I wanted to incorporate it into my full-time career. So eventually I found this wonderful program at Berkeley, and I brought my two paths together. I have extensive experience working with a variety of disabilities in a variety of settings, educational, therapeutic, and musical. So I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. Our next slide is just a picture that I really love of myself eating a donut that one of my students decorated. So I love to include it in this presentation because I feel like it encompasses just our roles as teachers and our roles as music teachers. Sometimes it means more to our students than just being in the music classroom, right? And sometimes we're shown that when our student hands us a donut that they decorated in occupational therapy, right? So that's my donut. Our goals today will be to gain a better understanding of our students with high support needs, gain a better understanding of how to support our students with high support needs, and to learn strategies that can be implemented in your music classroom. And the strategies that we're going to be learning today will benefit all students. So you don't have to have a student with high support needs to implement these strategies. The strategies that we're going to go over will benefit all students, and often strategies built on universal design, they do benefit all humans, which is what a lot of these strategies are based on. What will we cover? We're going to cover what is high support? Like, what are high support needs? Like, what am I even talking about? How can we foster access and create more inclusive learning environments? And what are some strategies for teaching with significantly high support needs? Okay, so we're going to start with descriptions and characteristics of disabilities requiring significant support needs. What is high support needs? The Office of Special Education Programs describes students with high intensity support needs as children with low incidence disabilities, including those with persistent and severe learning or behavioral problems that need the most intense individualized supports. So other terminology includes extensive high support needs, high intensity needs, high support needs, or significant support needs. You might also hear terms like severely disabled or low functioning. Those are terms that I prefer to not use whenever possible, unless I'm quoting someone else. In the disabled community, these are terms that are not embraced and are often considered offensive for obvious reasons. To classify someone as low functioning or high functioning puts them in a box rather than expressing that someone might require different support or more support. Opens up more possibilities and is way less offensive. Low incidence disabilities. So low incidence disabilities basically means disabilities that occur less often, that you see less often, and oftentimes it means disabilities that occur together at the same time. So for example, a student with autism who is also deaf, or a student with cerebral palsy who is deaf and blind. So these are low incidence disabilities. These low incidence disabilities include visual or hearing impairments or simultaneous visual and hearing impairments, significant cognitive impairments, or any impairment for which highly specialized skills and knowledge are needed to provide early intervention services or a free, appropriate public education. So that C part of this description is a bit vague and very widely, like a wide scope. But basically, this description of any impairment for which highly specialized skills and knowledge are needed, hopefully through more integration of education systems, more educators will have these tools. So that's good to note. This definition may include autism spectrum disorders, deaf blindness, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, traumatic brain injury. Fighting ableism and fostering access. So the framework through which I view my teaching, or I try to view my teaching, is through an accessible design, anti-ableist, and I try my best to listen to and let disabled voices lead my practice. So considering ableism is a really big part of that, and trying to acknowledge my own ableism, ableism that exists in my classrooms and in society, is a big part of my practice in serving students with high support needs. So some terms to know. Ableism, in a really short description, is discrimination against disabled people, and this can manifest in the form of physical spaces being inaccessible, language being offensive, even our own preconceptions of what a disabled person is capable of, or even the discomfort that many people experience discussing disability or even saying the word disabled. Accessibility, when disabled people can easily use something, can easily get around somewhere. And this is a really important part, have a sense of belonging. So I think that is oftentimes the more difficult part of accessibility to foster, because we can create an accessible space. You know, you can provide a ramp for someone who has a mobility impairment. You know, you can provide large text for someone who has a visual impairment, but is the space that you're creating safe? And do disabled people feel like they belong in that space? That's super important. Accommodations, changes that make things easier for disabled people. They help disabled people get the same things as non-disabled people. And we'll be talking more about what kind of accommodations we can provide in our classrooms for our disabled students, particularly our disabled students with high support needs. I want us to think about the way we perceive disability. Disability is often viewed through a medical lens, a problem that exists in a person's body and requires fixing. But as educators, I ask that you consider viewing disability in a new way, if this isn't how you view it already. I would love for us to view it through the social model. This means barriers in society create disability. A lack of fit between a body and its social environment. So shifting our viewpoint will not only help us to accommodate, support, and educate our students with high support needs, but also advocate for them, which is a big part of our job as educators as well. The medical model of disability says people are disabled by their impairments or differences. Under the medical model, these impairments or differences should be fixed or changed by medical and other treatments, even when the impairment or differences do not cause pain or illness to the person. I think it's an assumption by most people, non-disabled people, that disabled people want to be cured or fixed. And it's just not the case. The social model of disability, developed by disability rights activists in the 1970s and 80s, suggests that if societies were set up and constructed in a way that was accessible for people with disabilities, those individuals would not be restricted from full participation in the world around them. So here we have a video that better explains the social model of disability. So I'm gonna play it and hopefully it plays.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users. They run everything. There aren't any able-bodied people, so naturally, when they built the town, the community decided it was pointless to have ceilings 10 foot high and doors 7 foot high. So the ceilings were built at 7 foot and the doors at 5 foot. In every way, they designed the place the way they wanted it. One day, a few able-bodied people come to stay. One of the first things they notice is the height of the doors. And the reason they notice is because they keep hitting their heads. They come to stand out by the bruises they carry on their foreheads. Soon, doctors, psychiatrists, and social workers all become involved. Committees are formed. Many people are worried about what becomes known as the problem of the able-bodied. Throughout the town, there is a growth of real concern. Specially toughened helmets are handed out, free to the able-bodied, to be worn at all times. Braces are designed which give support and relief, while keeping the able-bodied wearer bent to normal height. Various groups of compassionate wheelchair users get together and form registered charities. Every quarter they have a collection day. Upturned helmets are left in pubs and shops for people to drop their small change into. There is talk of founding special homes. But then one day, it dawns on the able-bodied that there is nothing actually wrong with them, just that society excludes them.
So I love this video because it really shows like a paradigm switch of society creating disability.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users.
Let's see if we can get to
They
my
run
next
everything.
slide. Let me pause this.
There aren't.
Okay. I think if I do this. All right, great. In musical education settings, ableism can present as inaccessible spaces. So that means inaccessible physical spaces, like something as simple as your student cannot access your music room, or the physical space of the music room does not support their needs, particularly sensory needs for music classes, which we'll dive deeper into later in this session. Inaccessible curricula. So the curriculum is inappropriate for the student, or the student cannot access the curriculum because there is a lack of accommodations or modifications or supports for the student. Inaccurate perceptions of student ability, which is something that we can start working on right now, today, every day. What can a disabled student achieve, and what are our misconceptions of disability, and even what are our misconceptions of what is achievement, what is high achievement, what is success? How do we define these things in the music classroom, and how can we redefine these things to support our students better? increased preferences toward non-disabled students. This is another thing that we can begin reflecting on as educators. Do we show preference to students who have a more traditional ability toward music? And does that more traditional ability reflect their typical able-bodiedness? So our next slide here is fostering access in the music classroom. So here are some ways that we can foster access in the music classroom. And we're going to dive deeper into all of these strategies later on in the session. So assistive technology, accessible performances, accessible notation, accessible instruments, and equitable assessment, which is another tricky topic, I think. How does one assess our students with high support needs? Least dangerous assumption. We must form a least dangerous assumption when teaching students with high support needs. So we need to assume that they are capable, competent, and able to learn. We have to assume that they are wanting to learn. We need to talk to them and with them, not about them. So if a student, if a disabled student has high support needs and they have a one-to-one paraprofessional with them, when we are talking to or about our students, we need to talk to our students. The paraprofessional is not like the representative of the student. They are there to support the student. Same thing with, you know, talking with an educator. If your student is there, if your student is present, address your student. Don't assume that your student doesn't understand what you're talking about or isn't interested in what you're talking about. It's really important to adopt a least dangerous assumption. If that means following up with then addressing the paraprofessional or the teacher, then sure, go ahead and then address the paraprofessional or the teacher. But you have a person in front of you, your student is a person in front of you. It's really important to assume that that student wants to be involved in their education. And have high expectations for your students. They will surprise you, right? So it's kind of like that whole, if you have a goldfish and, you know, my whole life I had a goldfish and I had little goldfish bowls. And then as an adult, I bought a goldfish and I bought like a really big tank for my goldfish just because. And my goldfish thrived in this really big tank, right? So if we create this big space with big opportunity, high expectations for our students, they will meet them. Maybe in a different way than we're used to seeing, or in a different way that we might meet them, but they'll meet them in their way and they will surprise you. So just some reflective questions to think about and consider. What are some examples of ableist standards you've seen in music education? Is my classroom inclusive of students with disabilities? What accommodations do I currently offer students with disabilities? So these are some things to think about as we continue on in this session today. Classroom management. So classroom management is a big topic that I get a lot of questions about. And it seems to be, and unfortunately, I think, a really big focus point in special education in general. So again, I'm quoting from this book that I highly recommend, Beyond Behaviors. All children need time to build relationships of trust in order to risk making mistakes. Encouragement and reassuring adult presence helps children to stay calm and alert. While it may not always be easy to communicate with neurodiverse children, all adults in a child's life should strive to discover a child's intentions and ideas. The first step is building a relationship of trust, enabling the child to feel safe, take chances, and persevere to show us all he, she, or they know. And this quote not only applies to children, this is all people, children, teenagers, adults. We need to feel safe to learn. And when we increase feelings of safety and build those relationships, the behaviors that we face in our classrooms begin to diminish. I'd say the most important thing for managing any classroom, but especially for students with high support needs, is to develop trusting relationships that foster feelings of safety. Students with high support needs are under constant stress, perceiving their environments, and experience high levels of anxiety throughout the day. Many students are non-speaking and cannot advocate for themselves in the way that you and I, or myself and another speaking person, can. We need to rethink communication, become sensitive to body language and what our students' behaviors are trying to tell us. It is also key to know that a behavioral strategy that works for one student may not work for another student. When you meet one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. Every person with a disability is different, even if they have the same diagnosis. I cannot stress enough, behavior is communication. When I tell people that I specialize in working with students with high support needs, people so often say, "You must be so patient." And I know this is in reference to the behaviors students with high support needs often engage in. But what I try to explain is that students with high support needs are the ones being patient with me. Imagine if you were itchy and you couldn't scratch. You were told, "Don't scratch." And you couldn't even say like, "But I'm itchy." If every time you had to sneeze, you were told you have to hold it in. If you had someone repositioning your face whenever you didn't make eye contact with them, which literally happens in some therapeutic approaches for students who, prefer not to make eye contact, their faces will be held. This is what daily living can feel like for a student. Behaviors like stimming, avoiding eye contact, or sensory seeking can help students facilitate their learning process. So sometimes these behaviors that might distract us as teachers or might annoy us as teachers are helping our students to engage in their learning. So rather than trying to correct individual differences, I propose that we try to respect and support these individual differences. In doing so, you'll be helping your students appreciate signals from their own bodies, right? Respecting their own needs. It models acceptance of differences in behavior for your other students who might not have the same needs. And before you correct a behavior, I invite you to consider, is this behavior hurting anyone? Is it hurting other students? Is it hurting the student in question? Is this behavior impeding on the learning process? Is it keeping everyone from learning? If the answer is no to these questions, then carry on. Better to keep a student in the room learning than engaging in an unnecessary power struggle or waste of time correcting a behavior just because you might perceive it as strange or annoying or distracting. So I've emphasized so far the need for fostering feelings of safety and building relationships with our students in order to help them to feel safe and regulated and ready for learning. If we do not feel safe and regulated, we cannot learn. There are so many studies to back this up. We also cannot teach if we feel dysregulated. So it's extremely important for us to be able to regulate ourselves in the very hectic environments that we work in. And it's really important to model this regulation and behavior for our students. In doing so, we also foster a feeling of safety and reduce stress for our students with high support needs. On this slide, you'll find a checklist from the same book that I've been raving about for the past 10 minutes, Beyond Behaviors. It's a checklist for self-regulation in order to provide cues of safety. So some questions you'll see are, am I working off an emotionally stable platform? Are the cues I'm providing my students supportive of social engagement? Am I truly present with the student? Is the volume of my voice appropriate? Is there warmth and a caring tone to my voice? Is my face expressing safety and engagement? Is my posture expressing safety and engagement? Is my posture relaxed and inviting? We need to model safety for our students with high support needs to allow for deep and meaningful learning. We cannot learn if we do not feel safe and regulated. So how can we expect our students to? Here are some alternatives to more common behavioral strategies that you might have seen in classrooms or you might engage in your own classrooms. These are just strategies that I prefer to try to use rather than planned ignoring. So sometimes planned ignoring is useful if it's very, very obviously attention seeking. But I think specifically for students with high support needs who, particularly those who have not yet been given access to a communication system that is meaningful for them, and that allows them to communicate with others, it's really important not to ignore those students. I think the nature of not being able to communicate in an efficient way, you're already being ignored quite often, whether it's intentional or not, of your caretakers and teachers. So rather than ignoring a student's behaviors that are bothersome or distracting, I prefer to address and try to redirect the student, right? Maybe you just want to spend some time engaging with the student and then see if you can redirect them to something that is more in line with what the lesson is about. But, as teachers, we're creative. You can take a behavior and turn it into the lesson. So if a student is doing something silly with their body, right, or something that's not aligned with what's going on in the lesson, is there any way that you can take that behavior and bring it into the lesson? Like maybe if the student's jumping up and down, can we all start to jump up and down and relate it to some kind of lesson and rhythm? So it's really important to put on that creative thinking hat when working with students with high support needs. Power struggles. Okay. Once you're engaged in a power struggle with a student, you've already lost. So choose your battles wisely. Is it worth it? Is it worth the argument? Is it worth the stress that we're causing our students that already live pretty stressful lives? Punishing negative behaviors. I am in line with the philosophy that punishments very often do not accomplish what we think they are accomplishing. So rather than punishing negative behaviors, praise positive behaviors to the extreme. Even a behavior that's like, it seems like something not worth praising. If a student is usually up out of their seat and you're hoping to get them in their seat a little bit more, whenever they're sitting in their seat, you praise them. You let them know they're doing a good job. Working for preferred items. This is something that's often, like you're kind of trying to like seduce a child into wanting to learn by using like a preferred toy as a, like you could use this after you accomplish that. Why not try to incorporate those preferred items into the lesson somehow? Then you're kind of, not only are you getting them engaged, but you're not needing to like trick them into wanting to engage. So maybe that preferred item can be used as, again, like a musical instrument, right? Maybe you could use that preferred item to tap out a rhythm or create some kind of song. It's really important to keep that creativity and flexibility going in our teaching. Raising your voice. Okay, I'm not a big fan of raising my voice when I teach. Not only is it bad for our voices, but it's bad for our students. Unless there's like an emergency situation happening or you really need students' attentions, getting creative about how to get the attention of students, I think, is really important. Maybe you have like a chime bell in class that gets students' attentions. Maybe you have some kind of silly movement. Maybe you need to get involved, right? Physically involved with your students, kind of meet them where they are to regain their attention. But yelling at our kids is something to avoid. Okay, be proactive, not reactive. Super important, especially when teaching students with high support needs. So be proactive to help students stay regulated and engaged in learning. Plan in sensory and or movement breaks into the lesson. For example, freeze dance or freeze play with instruments. The more that you can make your lesson fun, the more the students will be engaged. I like to make my teaching so play-based, and anytime I need to teach anything, I think, how can I turn this into a game? Keep your students engaged. If we aren't the most interesting thing in the room when we teach, then I don't think we're doing our jobs, right? We're teachers, but we're also performers in a sense, right? We need to keep these minds interested in what we're saying the whole time. Be flexible, playful, get creative, and it's okay to be silly in the classroom. It's okay to make a fool of yourself, and it's okay to try something and have it not work. That's also important to model for our students, right? Not everything has to work. Not every idea we have is going to work, and that's okay, right? It's important for our students to see us try things, be vulnerable, and sometimes it's okay for our students to see those things not work out and us carry on from them. Okay, I have now a break scheduled into our session. So let's take let's take a 10-minute break. So right now it's 10:25 and we will return at 10:35. I'm going to put this into the chat that will return at 10:35. Break. Return hopefully you can see that in the chat. So let's take our break and I'll see you all at 10:35. Okay, we are back from our break. We will have another break in this session. So, okay. Let me get my screen oriented again. Okay. So before our break, we were talking about some kind of general ways of approaching classroom management. Our next section of this session will be some more specific teaching strategies, which I know we're all craving for, to bring back to your classrooms and start applying with your students. And again, these strategies are not only useful for students with high support needs, but all students. Okay, in our next slide, there is a video that I'd like to share with all of you. This video, or really it's like a piece. This piece was created by Amelia Evelyn Voicey Baggs, also known as Mel Baggs. They were an American non-binary blogger who predominantly wrote on the subject of autism and disability, and became well known in the early stages of the autism rights movement. In this piece, this is the description of the piece from YouTube. The first part is in my native language, and then the second part provides a translation, or at least an explanation. This is not a look at the Audie gawking freak show as much as it is a statement about what gets considered thought, intelligence, personhood, language, and communication, and what does not. So the reason I wanted to include this video is that there are a number of resources on YouTube and the media at large describing and explaining what life with a disability is like. Oftentimes, though, people belonging to the high support needs population do not get the same representation for reasons I think Baggs touched on in their description of this piece. This is not a look at the Audie gawking freak show statement. I think that there's still a level of discomfort in society when being invited into experiences of people with disabilities requiring high support. And I selected this video because it's a really amazing window into this experience, and it is an incredible statement about what do we consider thinking, what do we consider intelligence to be, what do we consider personhood to be, and what do we consider language and communication to be. So I'm going to let this first person perspective speak for itself, and as soon as I can, I'm going to hit play. Okay. I'm sorry to pause the video. I did see in the chat that the screen is being cut off. I think I've readjusted it. Could you just kindly let me know if that, if I achieved that? Can we see the screen better now that I kind of realigned it? Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for letting me know. If anything like that comes up in this session, please write it in the chat and let me know. Okay. I'm going to restart the video.
The previous part of this video was in my native language. Many people have assumed that when I talk about this being my language, that means that each part of the video must have a particular symbolic message within it, designed for the human mind to interpret. But my language is not about designing words or even visual symbols for people to interpret. It is about being in a constant conversation with every aspect of my environment, reacting physically to all parts of my surroundings. In this part of the video, the water doesn't symbolize anything. I am just interacting with the water as the water interacts with me. Far from being purposeless, the way that I move is an ongoing response to what is around me. Ironically, the way that I move when responding to everything around me is described as being in a world of my own, whereas if I interact with a much more limited set of responses and only react to a much more limited part of my surroundings, people claim that I am opening up to true interaction with the world. They judge my existence, awareness, and personhood on which of a tiny and limited part of the world I appear to be reacting to. The way I naturally think and respond to things looks and feels so different from standard concepts or even visualization that some people do not consider it thought at all, but it is a way of thinking in its own right. However, the thinking of people like me is only taken seriously if we learn your language, no matter how we previously thought or interacted. As you heard, I can sing along to what is around me. It is only when I type something in your language that you refer to me as having communication. I smell things. I listen to things. I feel things. I taste things. I look at things. It is not enough to look and listen and taste and smell and feel. I have to do those to the right things, such as look at books, and fail to do them to the wrong things, or else people doubt that I am a thinking being. And since their definition of thought defines their definition of personhood so ridiculously much, they doubt that I am a real person as well. I would like to honestly know how many people, if you met me on the street, would believe I wrote this. I find it very interesting, by the way, that failure to learn your language is seen as a deficit, but failure to learn my language is seen as so natural that people like me are officially described as mysterious and puzzling, rather than anyone admitting that it is themselves who are confused, not autistic people or other cognitively disabled people who are inherently confusing. We are even viewed as non-communicative if we don't speak the standard language, but other people are not considered non-communicative if they are so oblivious to our own languages as to believe they don't exist. In the end, I want you to know that this has not been intended as a voyeuristic freak show where you get to look at the bizarre workings of the autistic mind. It is meant as a strong statement on the existence and value of many different kinds of thinking and interaction in a world where how close you can appear to a specific one of them determines whether you are seen as a real person, or an adult, or an intelligent person, and in a world in which those determine whether you have any rights. There are people being tortured, people dying, because they are considered non-persons, because their kind of thought is so unusual as to not be considered thought at all. Only when the many shapes of personhood are recognized will justice and human rights be possible.
Okay. Oh, sorry. There's more. Okay. So this video is, I think, one of the most important videos or pieces, thought pieces that an educator or person working with a disabled person with high support needs should see. I think it beautifully captures how thought, communication, and engagement can be different, but still valid. If anyone would like, I just like to invite anyone to write in the Q&A section, even though it's not really a Q&A, any thoughts that they might have had, just because after watching this piece, I'm hesitant to just like rush onward to the next slide. So I'm just gonna open up the Q&A for like a few moments to see if anyone has anything to share about their experience with this. I'll call it like a thought piece by Bags. So I'll leave that open-ended for just a moment to see if anyone would like to reflect or has anything to share after viewing that. And if there is nothing in the chat, that's also fine, right? Sometimes we need to just kind of absorb what we've seen and experienced in our own way. Okay, I'm gonna let that remain open-ended. I wanted to start with that video because I wanted to start with that kind of reframing of thinking and perception of our students with high support needs before we discuss strategies for teaching. I'm a huge proponent of student-led learning, and I strongly believe that when teaching students with high support needs, it is absolutely necessary to allow your students to lead with whatever parameters you've set within your lesson. Okay, the chat is disabled. Actually, I'm gonna take some time to do this because I think it's worthwhile. And I'm going to, So I'm not sure. It says the chat is disabled. Everyone. Okay, I think the chat's open now to everyone. So if you would like to reflect on the video that we just saw, I invite you to do that. I think that would be wonderful. I think the chat is enabled now. If you want to share any thoughts, I'll be checking in with the chat. I'm going to continue onward. Also, after this webinar, after we're finished with today, you will receive my slides and you'll have a link to that video. I think it's a very important piece for all educators to view. Okay, so considering individual differences in arranging your classroom and structuring your lessons will foster feelings of safety, reducing stress, and allowing for optimum learning. We must get to know our students' interests and incorporate them into our lesson planning as much as possible. This also is true for our students' sensory processing needs, our students' learning styles. We need to remember that this is their music class, not ours. Even though we're the teachers, it's not really our class. It's our students' class. This is their class. This is their time to learn. They're not going to get this time back. So we really need to make it about them. Get to know your students and honor their interests, their pacing, their learning style, and their support needs. Even if this means taking some time at the beginning of the semester or period or whatever you call it in your schools, lesson, whatever time you need. Take the time to get to know your students, even if you don't achieve the objectives you've set out to achieve. You don't achieve the goals you've set out to achieve. Taking the time in the beginning of that relationship will really build a foundation for the rest of your time with those students. And it's more likely that you will get to achieve those objectives and goals in the future. Okay. Managing the environment and maintaining regulation. So I've been speaking a lot about being proactive in our teaching rather than reactive. So instead of waiting for something to happen that we need to manage, being as proactive as possible to maintain and manage the environment for our students. So this means the physical environment, right? If you have a student that likes to throw things, maybe be sure that there aren't things available for your student to throw. Something as simple as that. If you know that you have a student that's really into, you know, exploring different textures and like touching clothing or touching hair, maybe have that student sitting at a distance from another student who will be very upset if they're touched by someone else. So this also means respecting students' personal space, not just of other students, but as the teacher. I see very often when teachers are working with students with high support needs, there is so much, almost like it becomes very invasive, right? There's a lot of hand over hand and adjusting students in their seats and moving them from here to there. A lot of the times it's just not necessary. You might be gaining compliance from a student, but is it true, authentic learning if that's the case? Don't get me wrong, sometimes it's definitely appropriate to like model rhythm, and especially, you know, we're using instruments, so sometimes you really do need to help a student manipulate their body. But if it's about gaining compliance, it's super important to just respect a student's personal space. Choose wisely what you insist upon. We kind of touched on that by picking our battles, right? We don't want to get into power struggles. It's super unnecessary and no one wins, especially not the teacher. Allow time for processing. Okay, a lot of our students, and not just students with high support needs, they need more processing time than we might need. So if you place a demand on a student, say you're saying, and we'll use this example later on, so I'll use it now. Pick up the drum. If a student with high support needs specifically doesn't pick up the drum right away, wait a few seconds. The processing time might be very different than your own. It's much better to say, pick up the drum and allow for that kind of silence that can be uncomfortable for some of us and awkward for some of us, or maybe we don't want to wait for a student to do what we've asked them to do. We need to let go of that. Pick up the drum, sit, wait. No more demands, no more language. If you see that the student is not picking up the drum, you can try other levels of prompting, which we'll talk about later on in the session. Narration of actions. I prefer to narrate almost everything I'm doing with a student. Again, because a lot of our students, especially with high support needs, come from, you know, they have backgrounds of a lot of trauma, whether it was, you know, whether this trauma was experienced like in a purposeful way from caretakers or teachers, it still can be traumatic to exist in a world like Bags has described, right? Where you're not taken seriously and you're kind of forced into compliance, and it can become very stressful and traumatic. So I like to narrate everything I'm doing in the classroom, especially when I'm close to a student. I'll say, okay, I'm going to move this instrument now. I'm going to put this pen in front of you. I'm going to get my guitar now. I think it helps, from my experience, I've noticed it helps students to feel calm if you are giving them a narration of what you're doing, a little bit more predictability in what's happening. And clear language, right? We don't want to throw too much language at our students, especially if they have a longer processing time, or are echolalic. So if you have a student that likes to repeat phrases that they've heard, keep the language clear, succinct, to the point, and really allow for that processing time. for your students. It can feel like you're waiting a long time, and that's fine. That's okay. And here I just have this little diagram of what success looks like. It's really important to remember this when teaching students with high support needs, and it's important to celebrate every success a student has. Maybe they were able to fully attend to tasks today. Maybe they were regulated and engaged the entire class. Maybe they didn't, perform perfect quarter note rhythms, but maybe they succeeded in other things that will allow them to succeed in those quarter note rhythms later on. So really celebrate successes, even if they seem small to us, and really value the process over the product. Those quarter note rhythms, they'll come, right? But enjoy the process and facilitate your students enjoying their process, because then authentic learning will happen. Okay. Here's just another way of thinking about supporting, reframing our teaching, supporting and celebrating neurodiversity. So different thinkers and different brains and different ways of experiencing. Not all brains learn the same way. So how can we support diverse learners? And here's just a short video describing neurodiversity.
Just like our fingerprints, all our brains are unique. But for the majority of people, their brains are similar enough that there are largely no obvious differences in how they function. They have differences in things like skills, preferences, and styles. But mostly, their brains mean they perceive the world in the same way. But for others, their brains are more fundamentally different. They have differences in things like social understanding, sensory processing, communication, and information processing. These differences are a result of neurological differences, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and more. This natural variation in our brains is called neurodiversity. Those of us with no neurological conditions are neurotypical, and those of us with neurological conditions are neurodivergent. Neurodivergent people think differently. Their unique perspectives and experiences mean they can often excel at creativity and innovation, have highly specialized skill sets, and an ability to focus. If embraced, this can be a huge advantage to organizations and society. However, the differences neurodivergent people experience can make life challenging. In order to thrive at work, they often need some simple accommodations. For example, a sensory calm environment to recharge in, or a routine with the same start and end times. Approximately 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent. So not only is embracing neurodiversity critical for a truly inclusive organization, but it also presents organizations with a huge opportunity.
Okay, and in this next section, we're going to see how we can take some of those strategies touched on in this video and apply them to our classrooms and our lessons. Ooh,
just like our fingerprints, all our brains.
There we go. So some strategies for the classroom. Supporting neurodiversity. Visual schedules. They talked about that in the video a bit. Timers, time warnings, and reminders. Prompting. Task analyses, social stories, video modeling, and sensory support strategies. All of the strategies listed before will help in supporting executive functioning for our students. I think that this is another really important concept to know more about. So we're going to watch this one more short video.
Executive function is a set of skills that stems from the coordination of three cognitive processes: cognitive flexibility, working memory, and inhibitory control. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to pay attention and switch attention from one task to another. Working memory enables us to mentally hold and process information, and inhibitory control allows us to stop an impulse and display a more appropriate response. These skills help us plan, focus, remember instructions, and complete tasks. Executive function skills are important for mental and physical health, effective social communication, and short and long-term success in school and beyond. Executive function skills are particularly malleable in early childhood, but these skills can also be explicitly taught, practiced, and improved when children are at primary and secondary school. There are several things that teachers can do to support the development of executive function skills. Create an organised and well-structured classroom environment with clear expectations for children's behaviour and safe spaces for children to calm down after stressful events. Establish warm, responsive relationships with students. Model strong executive function skills by explicitly articulating when and how they are using these skills. Build students' autonomy, independence, and ability to self-monitor behaviour. And involve families in supporting and promoting the development of executive function. For more information on executive function, go to our website, theeducationhub.org.nz. Executive function is a set of skills that stems...
All right, so one of the strategies I listed before and that were touched on in both videos that we viewed in supporting neurodivergent students who might also struggle with executive functioning skills, visual schedules. So a visual schedule is a tool that we often use in special education classrooms or in a variety of situations where a person or student can benefit from visual supports. The purpose being to provide a visual display of some sequence of events. This can help minimize anxiety. This can be printed out before the class. This can be displayed in the same part of the room every day in your classroom, or this can be simply written out on a whiteboard. I've had many occasions where I was a CART teacher, and every time I went to go see a group of students, I would just jot down on a whiteboard the 5 main things we were doing, give a little doodle of each one, and it worked like a charm. Not everything has to be like perfect and, you know, to be supportive. So whatever you have available to you, the students will appreciate it. So here's an example of a visual schedule that I use in a private voice lesson that I teach to a student with high support needs. You can see that there is both text representation of the schedule and picture representation of the schedule. Depending on the person, some people prefer the visual, some people prefer the written visual. So I like to include both if I'm not sure of their particular preference. So you see it starts with the beginning, the middle. I've worked in some breaks so the student knows when the breaks are coming. They know how long the break is. And then we have a goodbye. And here you also see that we have some student choice involved with every lesson, student choice. If the lesson isn't already designed around student choice, which this one is, there is an opportunity for student choice. So a clear beginning and ending, scheduled breaks with the time of each break, and student choice are super important with visual schedules. Next, you see a choice board. This I did not design. I purchased it off Teachers Pay Teachers from, I guess there's a, down at the bottom there, you can see Suddenly Telly SLP. So a speech language pathologist, so a speech therapist, created this choice board for music class. And it's just a pretty good generic choice board for a general music class. And you can see there are options for instruments. There are options for actions like my turn or may I have the. So a student can point to may I have the and then point to recorder. This could assist in using verbal language. They could just simply point to the choices in place of using verbal language. Again, you see a representation of text and pictures. You could also use a choice board to help communicate with a student. So it's not just for a student to communicate with you. For example, if I wanted to communicate to a student, your turn, right? Or I could say, choose the, and then point to the instrument that the student is choosing. Time warnings are a frame of reference for students to process how much time is left in an activity or how much time there is in between activities. Time warnings are actual timers or time limits being set to help students transition either from activity to activity or environment to environment. Coupling auditory reminders with time warnings can help students as well. So even if a physical timer going off and you hear the timer going off can help a student, pairing a visual of the timer counting down with that bell at the end or the warning at the end, but also throughout. So if I have a student and I've set a timer to help them know that this activity is going to last 10 minutes or this break is going to last 10 minutes, I will not only present them with a timer that they can see counting down and that notifies them orally when it goes off, but I'll also let them know you have 5 more minutes. Then I'll say you have 2 more minutes when 2 more minutes arrives. And then usually for the last 10 seconds, I count down 10. And not only do I count down, but I'll offer 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all done, which is an ASL sign. We'll go over that too. That way they are really supported in knowing and being able to predict when they're going to have to transition to a new activity. Sometimes students will really love an activity or they're really getting into whatever they're doing during their break time. And to just kind of tell them, oh, break's over, is kind of jarring for some students. So you really want to support them in that transition. Also here is listed just an example of a visual schedule with time also. So this can be really good to have. This might be more useful for general classroom teachers who have a class for a full day, but it's an example of how to pair time with a visual to create a schedule to support our students. This next slide is showing prompting, the prompting hierarchy. Prompting hierarchy refers to the order and different levels of support that can be used to help a student respond to or perform tasks. And they range from least to most intrusive or like invasive. So kind of like what I talked about earlier with respecting the personal space of our students, particularly those with high support needs, who are often being just touched a lot and being moved around and being, so we want to really be as respectful as possible. And again, when you're prompting, allow for processing time. If you know that a student has a long processing time, allow for that processing time, and also encourage other teachers and paraprofessionals who are working with those students to honor that processing time as well. So here we see this prompting hierarchy going from least intrusive at the top to most intrusive at the bottom. The least intrusive is a natural cue. So maybe, all right, we're all done using our drums. And we're thought, okay, we're just supposed to know to put them away. Okay, so a natural cue. The activity has ended. Then you can add a gesture. It's time to put the drum away, right? A physical gesture can be very useful for our visual learners. A verbal gesture, put the drum away. So you've added that verbal, put the drum away. So you're pointing to where the drum is supposed to be going. Then you can add a visual picture, which you'll see on the next slide. You can model yourself putting a drum away. And then comes the kind of more invasive, more intrusive, helping a student. So you can start by gesturing at the elbow very lightly toward the drum, or a full physical would be like a hand over hand, which is, try that last. Go through all the prompts from least intrusive before you rely on the most intrusive. And that might take some waiting, and that's okay, right? We have time for our students. We will wait. And here is this example of put the drum away, presented in this order of prompts. And you can see here is a picture that you can represent the visual of putting something away. Okie doke. So our next one here is a task analysis. So task analysis is the breaking down of a skill into discrete steps to be performed in a sequence. So the first step in creating a task analysis is identify the task to be analyzed, break the task down into subtasks, and then once you've created the task analysis, show the analysis to someone else to check for consistency. So we're staying with a theme of putting a drum away in music class. And again, this is a transition moment. And sometimes transition moments can be really tough for students with executive functioning differences. So putting a drum away. You're breaking this task down into super discrete subtasks. Look at the drum, which is important for picking up the drum. And these are, students might need support with these subtasks. Look at the drum, get your hands ready, pick up the drum, hold the drum, walk to the closet, put the drum on the shelf, walk back to the seat, and sit down. So these task analyses can be made to support students with transitionary tasks, more simple tasks like putting a drum away, but they can also be made to support students in completing more complicated tasks like tuning a ukulele or putting together a clarinet, depending on what your student is currently working on. Here is a social narrative specifically made for a music classroom. So a social narrative or social stories help students increase their awareness and comprehension of social situations. So for this example, this is kind of laying out for the student what they can expect in music class. Like we saw in the video, the executive functioning video that we viewed before, clear expectations, schedules, anything that we can provide the student to reduce anxiety and help them make sense of their learning environment. So here you see sometimes music class can be too loud. This is okay. I can wear headphones if it's too loud. I can also raise my hand to show I need a break. I will walk someone quieter until I'm ready to come back. When I'm ready, I can go back and enjoy music class. Okay, video modeling. So video modeling is basically creating a video support for students in helping them to perform a skill or a task. So this example is playing middle C on the piano. There are 3 types of video modeling that you can create for students. One is basic video modeling. So you video a peer or an adult performing the skill of sitting down at the piano and playing middle C. Then you can do video self-modeling, the student performing the skill, which might be more accessible for some students to see themselves doing and performing the skill. Then there's point of view modeling. So point of view modeling would be either you or the student. It might be easier if you are filmed. For point of view modeling, it might be easier if you video yourself or another adult or a peer. So it's from the point of view. So it's, if I was sitting down at the piano, I have my phone, let's say I have my phone and I'm recording myself playing middle C. That way the video that the student views is a perspective that they would have themselves performing the task. So 3 different options for that video modeling support. Our next strategies are going to be mainly about supporting sensory differences. So we're going to view this video that gives a little bit more information about what sensory processing is.
We have 8 senses. 5 you have probably heard of: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And 3 that you may not be familiar with. The vestibular sense, sometimes known as the gravity or balance sense, allows us to move smoothly. It helps us with balance while we walk and run, and to stay upright when we sit and stand. Proprioception is the sense of self-movement, force, and body position. It is present in every muscle movement you have. Without proprioception, you wouldn't be able to move without thinking about your next step. Interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body. For example, when you're hungry, thirsty, in pain, or need the toilet. Imagine for each of our 8 senses, we have a cup. And for us to feel regulated, each cup needs to be full. Each time we get some sensory input for one of our senses, it fills up the cup a little. For each sense, some of us have big cups, and some of us have small cups. Imagine you have a small cup for sound. It fills up quickly with a little noise, and any more can feel overwhelming. Imagine you have a big cup for proprioception. You will need lots of movement to feel regulated. Understanding someone's sensory profile is really important in order to know what they need to feel, learn, and perform at their best.
Awesome. So we have those 3 additional senses that we don't often think about, right? The vestibular sense, proprioceptive sense, and the interoceptive sense. So how our body is moving in space, what we feel in our bodies, and our balancing sense. And with sensory processing, it's not just, things are too loud or things are too bright or I don't like this texture. It's also feeling your body in space and time. And how can we support our students with their sensory processing. Some students might need to flap their hands. Some students might need to jump up and down. Some students might not like touching an instrument because it feels strange in their hands. Some students might not like a certain note. We need to be aware of our students' differences and preferences to support their learning. And now, like I kind of touched on at the beginning of the session, these are not things that we're going to know right away, right? So we have to get to know our students. We have to be kind to ourselves in learning about our students. We're not going to get everything right on the first try, but that's okay. It's better to take the time and observe, try different things, and take those risks as educators in getting to know our students and supporting our students, and know that sometimes you're not going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to make a suggestion. It's not going to be the right suggestion. Sometimes you think you're going to set up something awesome that your student's going to love, and they might hate it. That's okay, because you're going to get it right too.
We have 8.
Oh, okay. So here are some sensory supports that you can be aware of in your classrooms, in your teaching, or you can start to implement, you can offer. Some of these you do need an occupational therapist to approve of, but I would say having noise canceling headphones in the music classroom, totally important if the student doesn't already bring their own. Also having some kind of visor or sunglasses in case the room is too bright for the student, and having some kind of glove options in case they don't like the touch of certain instruments. Also avoiding wearing like strong smelling perfumes, avoiding having like strong smelling scent diffusers in your rooms. The others here that you see where it says ask an OT, you will need to get some kind of permission and or training from an occupational therapist working with your student at your school or at whatever center you're working at, or maybe they have an occupational therapist that they work with already. Joint compressions are something that or squeezes, right? Some students are really sensory seeking and they need some squeezes, some head squeezes, some joint compressions, or just like body squeezes. But these are things that you definitely want to check in with an occupational therapist, because every student has a different sensory diet, if you will. Also, you see here weighted blankets or weighted vests can be really comforting for students to help them feel their bodies, relieve anxiety, and chewies for students that, especially students that like to like mouth instruments and taste instruments and chew instruments, offering them something that they have that is designated for them to use to chew on is super helpful. I hate telling a student not to engage with an instrument in an inappropriate way, such as mouthing, unless I have an alternative to offer them. So I'm kind of a stickler for, if I'm in a music class and a student is putting something in their mouths that's not supposed to be in their mouths, I will risk getting in trouble to avoid that power struggle with that student unless I've been provided with an alternative for that student. So it's it provides an opportunity to advocate for your students. So I've made the argument many times to occupational therapists or mental health clinicians or ABA therapists, if we do not want this student engaging in this behavior, what are we offering them to replace this behavior, rather than just taking away something that might really help them to regulate. Okay, we can move on to our next slide. These are some fidget toys that are also really great to have in the room. This seat here, I'm not exactly sure. I'm unfamiliar with what that seat, that chair is offering, but there are lots of chairs that are designed for students to be able to rock back and forth in safely. It's also like if you have it in your budget to buy like a mat to place on the floor. I've had students that love to rock, and I've seen paraprofessionals and teachers just saying, stop it, don't do that. But what are we offering to remedy that need for the student? So if you are able to place a mat behind a student and they happen to fall back, they fall on a mat, they fall on a cushion, and they're safe and they can learn the way that they want to learn. But again, these are things that as educators, you'll need to advocate for your students. But they deserve these things to be able to learn in the best way for them. So here's some sensory toys, and you can speak with the team, your students' team members. So like occupational therapists, sometimes a speech therapist might be able to help, ABA therapist, mental health clinician, special ed teacher. Visuals are super useful in supporting our students with high support needs. These are just some examples of visuals that I've used in my classrooms to help my students and support their learning. I have a Q&A, I think. Wait, I'm trying to look at it. Oh wait, I have it open. Sorry, I'm checking the question. The rubber band might be the chair, the rubber band. Okay, see, maybe the band. Yes. Yes. That's right. I didn't even notice that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to enable the chat. So if we could all talk in the Q&A, I'm okay with that. I don't know if you can all see the Q&A, or can I only see it? Which is unfortunate. So I'm going to just read out loud what I see in the Q&A, since I'm not sure how to enable this chat. We might not be able to since it's a webinar, but I'm going to read some things I saw in the chat because they're super useful. One read, it may not be the chair, the rubber band is something we use. So maybe the band, someone else said maybe the band that's for students to put their feet to push on. The chair, oh, and we have a former OT here. That's awesome. The chair has a heavy duty rubber band for students to place their feet on, receiving proprioceptive input through their feet to help remain still in their chair. And this is from a former OT, which is super cool. I'm so happy to have you here. Okay. Our next slide. So keep comments coming in the Q&A because I'll read them out loud and we'll address them. I don't know why the chat's not working. Sorry about that. Okay, so some visuals. We've already touched on some of these. Schedules and expectations can be presented visually. Choice boards. Visual representations of spoken language and song lyrics. We're going to take a look at some examples of that. That's kind of more specific to musical learning. And adapted notation. Okay, and I might not have a slide in here for ASL, using ASL, so I'm going to try to remember to talk about it. If for some reason I don't and someone remembers it and they're dying to know, put it in the Q&A. I'm going to try to remember that. Okay, so pictorial representations of language, including song lyrics. So here, this was on my other slide. But if we are providing direct instruction or we're asking questions, it can be helpful to provide some kind of visual pictorial context. So here you see which instruments being played in this song. And here you can see a person with question marks with a, one of these gestures, shrugging gestures, thinking about different instruments. And then you see, how did this music make you feel? So you have the same picture having some kind of consistency here. Thinking question marks with different emotions surrounding the person. So having the written text along with a pictorial representation can really help our students, all students actually, not just students with high support needs. Next, I'm going to show you some visual representations of song lyrics. So this is a visual representation of slides that I love to use when I'm doing, if you haven't guessed already, Doe a Deer from The Sound of Music. I love using this song as a kind of foundational teaching song because it's really easy to offer pictorial representations, and it's also a great stepping stone for learning solfege. So here we have, I'll go through, we'll sing each lyric, and I'll have a picture accompanying each lyric. And depending on the student's preferences, I'll have like the Kodai hand sign as a part of these slides rather than the written Doe. I like to use color representations. So here we have Doe, a deer, a female deer, Ray, a drop of golden sun, me, a name I call myself, Fa, a long, long way to run, So, a needle pulling thread, La, a note to follow so, Tea, a drink with jam and bread. That will bring us back to Doe. So another representation of this I've included is for You Are My Sunshine. This one I've used in lessons as well. This includes the text as well as a pictorial representation. So you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. So as much as you can, right? We are not going to be able to represent perfectly every lyric, but offering that visual can help students to start to remember the lyrics, the order of the lyrics, the emotions of the lyrics. So super useful. We're going to talk a little bit about adaptive notation next, but before we do that, I do want to talk about using American Sign Language in lessons. We're going to talk about it a little bit later because I do touch on teaching blind students, deaf students, and other more specific disabilities later on. And when we do talk about deaf students, I talk about ASL, but I have found that using ASL is so useful for all students. I need to talk with more SLPs about this, but for me, right, so when I started teaching deaf students, I started using ASL with them. I'm not an interpreter. I'm not fluent. So I'm not trying to like teach ASL. You should always learn ASL from a deaf person. So when I started using ASL, I started to use it more and more and more with my students who were still figuring out or still finding communication systems that worked for them. And ASL is naturally a visual language. So I found that just knowing some simple like all done or ready, want, music, singing, just very like stop, bathroom, things like that are so useful in lessons. Like choice board, all of these things, especially for students who are echolalic. It can be really helpful rather than orally repeating a phrase, repeating it using ASL. So I cannot emphasize enough, learning a little bit of ASL goes a long way. And it's super helpful. I kind of wish it was more of a widespread strategy. Okay, adaptive notation, iconic notation. So graphical representations of music that include rhythm and melody. So many of you, many music educators are probably already familiar with this, but it's super helpful. So these are some representations of iconic notation. So here you have the phonetic syllables. These are the Kodai syllables, I'm pretty sure. So we have titi, titika, tika tika. And I actually use different ones in my teaching, so I usually use takatika. But again, these can vary from teacher to teacher. With the students, like, try to keep it consistent. Consistency will probably help them. But use whatever syllables you like. And here you see just the written syllables. Then you see the syllables written in the notation to help bridge that connection. Then you see icons: apple, strawberry, watermelon. So here you can start with just presenting these icons, right? Written out: apple, strawberry, watermelon. Then you can start to bridge that gap by placing the images over these rhythmic notations. And this is something that I did. I made these in like Google Slides. You know, you have a picture of this. I have a picture of the TT rhythm, and then I just put some apples on top of it. And then you have an iconic notation. And again, kind of giving these little additional supports really goes a long way for our students. Color coding. I love using color coding. You do want to be careful. Color blindness is more prevalent in students than you might think, especially in male students. I forget the exact number, but it's higher than you'd think, where like maybe 2 kids in your class are probably going to be colorblind. So to try to be aware of that, see if you notice if color coding is helpful or if it is confusing for a student. I have found it to be pretty helpful, but just to be aware that not everyone sees color in the same way that I do, or you might be colorblind listening. So just to be aware. Here we have, you know, the major scale represented with the Kodai colors and the Kodai hand symbols. I love offering just those 2 options of like a kinesthetic connection and also a visual connection. Again, text, visual color representation, kinesthetic visual representation, kind of gives the student the option to gravitate to what speaks to them, what's meaningful for them. Here we have some color coding. This could be useful for students with dyscalculia who might have difficulty with like pattern recognition. So here we have, you know, all of the F sharps are highlighted in a light green. Again, this corresponds with like the Boomwhacker colors. I like to use the Boomwhacker colors, but you can create your own system if one is better for your students or another. So here you can see that these accidentals all correspond with a color for each one to help the student keep track of what they're seeing. And here is another example of a similar representation of color coding that extends to the music itself. So you have, you know, the accidental is boxed in, and I kept it consistent. If you see here, the flats have a box around them, the sharps have a circle around them. And here again, the boxes around the flats, and then the B flats all have a pink box around them in the music itself. And again, this is something that I've made using like really simple PDF. I'm not even a techie person, but it's like the PDF editors. You'll have my email and the slides after the session. So if you have any questions about how it's done, feel free to contact me and I'll help walk you through it. I'm not a techie person. It's pretty simple to do. If I could do it, you could do it. So here's another option of adapted notation that I created as an example. So this is for a student playing in an orchestra. You'll see that the notes are color-coded, and the length of the note, the duration reflects, the rhythmic duration reflects the length, the physical length of the note. You'll also see that the rests have been replaced with little quiet faces. So this could be useful for some students. Another version that I created, again, is color-coded here, with the F sharps reflecting a certain color, the G's reflecting a certain color. Again, the duration is reflected in the color continuing along the measure to show that duration. And here is one that I've shown to another music educator. They thought it was a little confusing. It is a little confusing, but for me as a student, when I was learning to follow a conductor, this might have been helpful for me. So I think it depends. And this goes for everything here, right? Every student's different. So what works for one student is not going to work for another. So it takes some creative thinking. This is geared more for a student who is struggling with following a conductor, following the beats in the music. You can see that the strong beats are a thicker line. There is still color used to reflect the different note being played. And then those little squiggle lines on top of the measures are the conducting pattern. So a student can know, okay, one is happening and I'm playing this note. Okay, when the hand is going up, I'm playing this note. So one of my friends thought this was confusing. When I look at it, it would be helpful for me. But again, every person's different. Every student's different. See what works for your students. See what doesn't work for your students. Trial and error is the name of the game. And again, that is okay. We don't need to know the answer right away. We're learning with our students too. Another strategy that I like to use to support executive functioning differences is movement. I had mentioned that earlier. I like to schedule in movement breaks into my class schedules, but also the activities that we do involve movement. It's super important to involve some kind of movement. I think it's really difficult to expect students to just sit still a whole lesson. It's hard for me to just sit still. So bring that movement into the lesson. That way they can stay engaged. So here are some examples of, freeze play, dance. So freeze dance is self-explanatory. A lot of us played freeze dance as kids. So you're dancing music and you have to stop. And again, you can use ASL. I already instinctively did it, but you can use ASL. This is dance, 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 stop. Dance, 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 stop. And I've used that a lot with my students with hearing impairments, actually. But you could use it with all your students, or you could have play, 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 stop. Play dance is when you're playing your instruments to music and you have to stop. So making that movement a part of the lesson. It also helps students practice responding to music appropriately as an ensemble. Body percussion. I love using body percussion. Kinesthetic, kind of creating body percussion patterns. Here you can see solfege hopscotch was something that I created. I'll show you in the later slide in a rhythm obstacle course. So here's an example of the rhythm obstacle course where you have some cones lined up or other markers on the floor. And you can place the music note, the rhythmic value with each one. So you see, you start with 1, and then if you were to jump 2 cones, it's a half note. If you're going to jump 3 cones, it's a dotted half note. If you're going to jump 4, it's a whole note. And again, depending on mobility available to students, this could be a step. This could be, you can make the cones closer to one another. So it's very flexible. You can make it what is appropriate for your students, or this activity might not be appropriate for your students or your classroom. And then we have the solfege hopscotch, where you're also traveling from solfege note, one solfege note to another. You can sing them as you go. You can say them as you go. You can represent the hand signs as you go. These two exercises, activities help to show that abstract concept of duration and pitch distance in like a physical form. And here you see an example of body percussion exercises here. Okay, we're scheduled for another break. So let's take another 15-minute break. So that will bring us to, I'm not great at math, 12:05. Okay, I'm gonna put that in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see it, even though we're not able to really access it otherwise. So break, return at 12:05. Cool. Okay, I will see you all at 12:05. Okay, we are back from our break. Before we moved on to our next section, which is going to be assistive technology, I just wanted to share one slide that I forgot to share. Oh, hopefully I can get back to my Zoom. And I think I need to realign it with the screen like last time. Wait. Okay, here I go. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to share, one more visual. Where is it? Oh, I don't think it's showing up in the, maybe if I put it here, let's see. Okay, I think I need to stop. All right, I think I would need to stop the share and redo it, and I think it's gonna take too much time. When I share the slide, you're gonna see another representation of time signature through body percussion. So actually, I'm just gonna show it. I'm gonna stop the share. I'm gonna start it again, because I think it's worthwhile. Another representation. So let me share my screen. And here we are. And then we're gonna do this. Okay, now you should be able to see. So this is a representation of time signature through body percussion. So you can see that the strong beat is always a stomp, clap. So if you're teaching 2/4, stomp, clap, stomp, clap, stomp, clap. Then if you're teaching 3/4, the strong beat remains a distinct stomp, clap, clap, stomp, clap, clap, stomp, clap, clap. And then we have 4/4, stomp, clap, 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 stomp, clap, clap, clap. And this might be more accessible for some students. Okay. All right, we're gonna move right on to assistive technology. Okay, augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC systems. You might encounter AAC devices when teaching students with high support needs. AAC stands for augmentative and alternative communication. This includes any type of communication that is not speech, so sign language, choice boards, or body language. Most AAC devices are apps downloaded onto an iPad or a tablet. Some of them are symbol-based or picture-based, and others are text-based using letters. Many are multimodal, so they will use both text and pictures. So here you can see a student who uses an AAC device on an iPad can select different words that they'd like to express. They can create full phrases or sentences. AAC devices are often grouped into different like categories. So you'll have like my day, or people at school, actions, foods, depending on how the speech language pathologist or speech therapist has set the AAC device up. So if you have a student using an AAC device, see if you yourself can get comfortable using it, not using it, but using it with the student and getting to know the AAC device, because the more the student uses their AAC device, the more fluent they become in communicating through their AAC device. Here we have some examples of adaptive switches. So disability adapted switches are used by people with mobility disabilities or physical disabilities. So they can be used to operate home appliances or fixtures, toys. I did support work for a family that had an adaptive switch for like to roll a dice, for board games, learning devices, and different types of electronic gadgets. So here are two examples of adaptive switches. One is a grip and puff switch for a more significant mobility impairment, that you blow into the switch and it signals the switch. And a light up switch can be used for someone with a visual impairment, so it's easier to see the switch. There are also switches with like texture, things like that. So our next slide is an example of a very young child using a Big Mac switch to participate in singing, to participate in creating music. So as we watch this video, I want you to note how the adult, I'm not sure if it's a parent or caregiver or therapist, notice the wonderful job that this person does in attending fully to the child and allowing for plenty of processing wait time for the child to respond and use the switch.
Arnold had a farm. And on that farm he had a dog. With woof woof here and a woof woof there. Here a woof, there a woof, everywhere a woof woof. Old MacDonald had a farm. And on that farm he had a duck. With a quack quack here and a quack quack there. Here a quack, there a quack, everywhere a quack quack. Old MacDonald had a farm. And on that farm he had a horse. You gotta tell me. With a neigh here and a neigh there. Here a neigh, there a neigh, everywhere a neigh, neigh. Old MacDonald had a horse. And on that farm.
Awesome. I'm going to pause it there just because we have a few more slides to get through. But the Big Mac switch is a great tool. I've used it in sessions before. Usually I think you can record like up to three recordings at a time, and then you can change the recordings. So you can re-record things as you go. It's a really useful tool. Okay, we're gonna go to our next slide, even though this one's so adorable. Okay, adaptive instruments using a switch. So here are some examples of some different adaptive instruments. Oh, sorry, I'm moving things on my screen. That can use adaptive switches. You can see a switch activated bongo drum, jam box, a breath-powered musical instrument, music machine equipped with 2 holding arms that you can put in different percussion instruments, and a lighted tambourine. Just some examples. And again, these are things that you might need to advocate for your students, and they are not inexpensive devices. So it will take some advocating from the music educator to either the school district or whichever organization or family or guardian is involved. I wanted to address teaching music for deaf, blind students or students with visual impairment, hearing impairment, deaf blindness existing at one time. So some deaf blind strategies. Adaptations through a multisensory approach. So some questions to ask yourself. how can I adapt the sound to maximize accessibility? How can I make my lesson visually accessible? How can I make my lesson vibrationally accessible? How can I make my lesson kinesthetically accessible? So really thinking outside the box of traditional musical teaching for instances like these. So I actually want to go back to this. Actually, we can continue to this slide. So some strategies that I've used that have been very successful in the music classroom when teaching deaf and hard of hearing students has been just turning up that volume, not just so that the music is louder, but so that there is more vibrational feedback, and giving students access to a subwoofer and really cranking up the bass. That way they get that vibrational feedback. I've had students, I've positioned students to sit right next to the subwoofer, to place their leg. They would prop their leg up on the subwoofer. I would hand another student a speaker from one student had the subwoofer, one student got to hold the speaker, to engage in the music in that way. Visualizers are also great. So piano roll visualization, which we'll see in the next slide. There's also a site called Veed.io. I don't even know how it's pronounced. I think it's Veed.io. And you can create a visual sound wave representation of different songs. So for students with visual impairment or blind students, large print and appropriate color contrast. So this may vary from student to student. So it's important to ask questions. When you find out you have a student with a visual impairment, it's not just enough to offer a large print. You want to check on what color contrast will work best for that particular student. Braille notation, I do not have personal experience using, but it does exist. There is a website called Dancing Dots, and it's a Braille music translator, and it creates Braille scores with optional verbal and musical cues. Touch cues are useful for both blind and deaf students. So sometimes I'll offer and again, check with your students or let them know that this is coming. Don't just touch your students, but tell your student or have the ASL interpreter say okay, I'm gonna tap the rhythm on your shoulder. So I'll tap a rhythm on a student's shoulder, right? I'll get very close and I'll model body percussion. Has been a great way for deaf students to be involved with music in a more authentic, meaningful way. Movements, so using solfege hand signs, body percussion, dancing, like I said, right, playing that freeze dance was really fun for my students. And familiarizing yourself with ASL, I can't emphasize it enough. It is such a useful tool. So in our next slide, I have an example of some audio visualizations. And so here's an example of a piano roll. And I love watching these, in my free time. But you'll see the notes are represented visually, the duration also, the placement on the keyboard. So this visual representation, along with having a subwoofer speaker offering the vibration, can be a way more meaningful experience than just, having your deaf students sit in class and not fully participating, and that's not fun at all for them. And then next to this video, you'll see the Veed.io music here, where it creates a sound wave that accompanies, and it moves along with the sound of the audio. And it's pretty easy to use. Okay, we're gonna move on to our next slide. So just to summarize some key points when teaching blind and deaf students and students with high support needs in general. Least dangerous assumption, assume that your students can do their best. Support their sensory differences, provide a routine and structure, multimodal access to material, multisensory approaches, adaptive instruments, and other supports. I did have a break scheduled next, but we only have 10 minutes, so we're gonna power through. We started a little late. So I wanted to talk a bit about assessment for students with high support needs. Traditional assessment in music education is inherently ableist, I would say. Safe to say. A lot of the standards of good technique are based around being able-bodied and neurotypical. So this is just something I've been exploring as an educator. I haven't figured it out yet by any means. So I think it's important to think, what is the most meaningful way to assess our students with high support needs? Current trends in musical curriculum and assessment emphasize, as I said, able-bodied music making, performance technique, student self-reflections that require a functional communication system, and typical engagement and learning that our students with high support needs might not yet have access to. So in order to remove some of these barriers, I created this rubric, just one template of a rubric, formative in design, emphasizes an individualized approach, centers life skills such as self-regulation, safety, and engagement, so that a student can begin being ready to be available for musical learning, rather than traditional technical musical skill and performance emphasis. So more process emphasis than product emphasis. So this is created to be a formative weekly assessment. It uses a 4-point measurement scale. Not yet engaged in learning, engaged in beginner learning, engaged in developing learning, and engaged in accomplished learning. And so some of the criteria and learning outcomes being measured are making music with others, manipulating instruments or using instruments, musicianship skills, and regulation functionality and safety. So the intention of this rubric is not to provide a grade in the traditional sense, but rather to measure progress and guide further teaching instruction. I'm a firm believer in that assessing your students is more of an assessment of your own teaching. So of my own teaching. So when I assess my students, I'm assessing my own success in teaching. Due to the sensory communication and developmental needs of students with low incidence disabilities, this rubric uses an informal, formative, observation-based assessment that teachers conduct weekly. Another way to assess students with high support needs or low incidence disabilities is the 3 Ps. So in addition to that rubric, teachers, music educators can implement the 3 Ps system to develop and document data when assessing their students. So the 3 Ps are process, product, and parameter. This approach is a formative assessment used by adaptive physical educators that describe a student's skills. This approach can easily be adapted to assess musical skills, and I've used it very often in when creating goals for IEPs and things like that. So process relates to the quality of a movement that can be analyzed into component parts. So a musical example might be, student can grasp a mallet with their dominant hand, lift their arm, and strike a percussion instrument. It's very, you can observe that and you can record data on that process. The product of the skill relates to the quantitative value produced by the student's performance. So skills will be quantified differently depending on the desired outcome, the chronological age of the student, and the goals of the class. A musical example might be students can strike a percussion instrument with a mallet 4 consecutive times while maintaining a steady beat. And then you have parameter, which refers to the conditions and levels of support under which the skill is performed. So a musical example might be, with a demonstration and hand-under-hand assistance, student can strike a percussion instrument with a mallet 4 consecutive times while maintaining a steady beat 4 out of 5 times. This is just an example of what appropriate assessment tools might look like for students with high support needs. I did want to leave some time for like Q&A. we're really nearing our end here. I just wanted to emphasize staff collaboration. I mentioned a lot of times speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, special education, general classroom teachers, guardians, paraprofessionals, a huge one. As someone who has an extensive background in support work, paraprofessionals are a great resource to use, and to ask, how is your student doing today? How are you doing today? First of all, ask your paraprofessional, how are you doing today? Then say, how has the day been? What have you noticed? Is there anything I should know? They're a great resource. And the more you get your paraprofessionals involved, the more they will want to be involved in your class. And a kind of music class tip hack for getting paraprofessionals involved and off like their phones. Maybe I hear that's like a big problem for people. I've definitely had issues with that. Put an instrument in their hand. Give everyone a shaker. Everyone's making music in music class. I have found that a lot of the time music class it's like math class, right? I would be terrified to sit in a math class and be engaged in a math class. For someone that has no background in music, it can be very intimidating to sit in a music class, just to be in a music class as an adult. So invite your paraprofessionals to be silly, make music, right? Let them know that they're going to be learning too. It might take a little bit more effort from your part as a teacher, but it will, in the long run, it'll help immensely to get their support and their feedback. So I'm going to skip to the end. This here is my my full name and my email. I forgot to mention I use the pronouns she, her. I don't think I mentioned that in the presentation. Sorry, I mentioned it last. But if anyone would like to contact me, please feel free. These slides will be given to you. They'll be sent to you. But if you have any like specific questions, any curiosities, you just want to like chat about this stuff, I love this stuff. So just shoot me a message. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm gonna open up, and I know we're ending now, but since we started a bit late, I'm going to stay on if anyone else can, and I think I can like allow you to talk. Let me see. Participants, and if anyone wants to put anything in the Q&A. Okay, I'm just gonna, how can I do this? One sec, let me see. Like one last attempt to engage with you guys. Okay, I'm gonna just put allow to talk. There's no pressure. If anyone doesn't want to engage right now or talk or anything like that, do not feel any pressure. But if anyone has any kind of question, I'm just gonna allow this time and space for anyone who might have a burning desire. If not, Thank you all for attending this session. I hope it was useful. And I really appreciate your interest to learn more. And it's something I really strive for as an educator, where I have so much to learn, and we should always be continuing to learn. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now. And I'll let anyone else speak if they would like. And if not, feel free to head out. And thank you all for attending.